Um, Thank you for the NESOC team that is helping us with the technology. Um, we will start soon. Thank you. All right. Um, Welcome everyone. It's 2:05. My name is Dr. Gabriela Pereira. My pronouns are ella, she. I am part of the Northeast Farmers of Colorland Trust. I work there, and my work is related to the Land Network program. I am the Land Network Weaver and part of the co-directors. With this, I want to welcome everybody to the space. So today we are going to talk about how we are co-creating land and kin sovereignty. How is our unique approach to creating alliance for liberation and on and with the land. And today we have in the room two board members, JD and Christine Hutchinson, and the whole team of co-directors and coordinators as well. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. The first part is a welcome. We are going to do a little pray for the land and for ancestors. I am going to move there in after Steph do that to do a little bit of housekeeping, explaining how we are going to do that presentation. And then our more board members, Christine and JD, will start to tell our origin story. Towards the end of this presentation, we are going to talk about what is the future and how are we working every day at NEFOC to make that sovereignty happen in the best way that we can. All right, Steph, all yours.
There you go. So Gabby. Stephanie Morningstar Nyangyats. I'm Stephanie Morningstar, Mohawk Turtle Clan. I'm the Executive Director and the Relationships and Reciprocity Co-Director at NEFOC. And we begin everything we do in gratitude and relationship. So we are going to offer a brief opening prayer for us today to ground ourselves in the sacred. This is a poem called Eagle Poem by Joy Harjo. To pray, you open your whole self, to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know there is more that you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing and in languages that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle on that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky and wind, swept our hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we're born and die soon within a true circle of motion, like eagle rounding out the morning inside us. We pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. Danito.
Gracias, Steph. Welcome, welcome, everybody. The first 5 minutes, we were just waiting for everyone to join us. After that, Steph opened the session with a beautiful poem. Thank you so much, Steph. So now is the time to hear from you all. Who are you in this work? So if you can share in the chat your name, pronoun, the land where you are, and what hat are you wearing today in this session, will be lovely to see all that love coming from the chat. Welcome, Rachel. Kirsten, Leslie, Fran, land access advocate. Thank you for all the work that you do, Fran, from Abenaki territory. Francesca, I'm so sorry, I moved too fast here. Francesca, welcome. Yeah, I have 3,000 things on my screen, and if I touch something wrong, we move to the next slide. So a little bit of patience here. All right, Liz, welcome as well. Donetta, Patricia, I saw them before. So if through the session you have questions, we will collect them from the chat. At the end, we will have about 20 to 15 minutes for your questions, comments, and I will give the floor to the wonderful Christine Hutchinson, our board member. Christine, are you ready? You are mute.
I guess I wasn't ready.
Yes, now you are. The floor is yours. Let me know when you want another slide.
Now, thank you, Gabby. Hello, everyone. Happy to see you all. I'm speaking to the origin story of this thing we call NEFOC, or the NEFOC Land Trust. A little background on me and agriculture. I spent some time while I was already an educator being a small poultry farmer, and I was very much on my own, isolated, and did not feel like I had any community. And I ended my foray into poultry farming in about 2014, not having made a lot of connection, not having made any connections with any other Black farmers or any BIPOC farmers. So within the origin story of NEFOC is a set of people who were actually seeking out community, trying to find other BIPOC farmers, and were successful in connecting with one another. They were happily, desperately, and finally fully connected. And once that connection came, shared experiences rose to the top of conversation. And in 2018, those conversations started leading toward the idea of finding ways of securing our place on land. And the idea of the land trust was planted. It was a small seed that was planted. And the photo that you'll see here was really my first time fully engaging with this idea and beginning to learn about the capacity of a land trust to reconnect us, me and people like me, to the land so that we could do what our passions drove us to do. Next slide, please. JD is in this picture too. I looked at it the other day. I saw you, JD. So from that time on, different people began tending the work, learning about what the systems that exist now are and how we might be able to work around or even within those systems, starting to speak more publicly to people about what has happened to many of us within this food growing industry and within our desires to care for land and to be on land and to be out there with the water and the wind and the trees and nature. Next slide, please. So this interesting organization was born, and everyone involved knew that this thing had to be built to stay. We wanted this thing to exist in perpetuity, as you'd say. And so we really started digging deep to learn about the legalities and find the resources to help us to learn what we couldn't figure out on our own. We started looking at how to organize this land trust structure, how to govern it. And also we wanted to continue relationship building that had already begun, because prior to this land trust seed being planted, there was already a network of sorts, the NEFOC network, which was that community coming for many of these BIPOC folks who had not had farming community as of yet. So you'll see some photographs of us in 2019 as we engaged in this work and started to learn how to do this thing and fully accept that we were doing this. It was happening, it was coming to fruition, and bringing this idea out to others and bringing more BIPOC farmers in. So at this point in 2019, we were a small group. The original group that started cultivating this idea was about 20 people. And through 2019 and into 2020, the numbers just grew exponentially. You can go to the next slide. By the time we settled into 2020, where things changed, you can see in the wording, we're doing a lot of the same things, but we're handling a pandemic. We're being heard. Black people who have been expressing the police brutality and discrimination that have gone on forever, we're finally really being heard, being caught on video, and everyone sitting still and watching those videos finally gave credence to what we've been saying since before my time, to what my father has been saying. So in interacting within the realm of those things, we still managed to continue learning and growing and building our structures. And we struggle to continue building our relationships. But it's clear that the other people wanted to have those relationships, and they were continuing to build because our numbers grew into the hundreds. So from the 20 or so people who started with this idea, it's just multiplied and multiplied. And I'm going to ask Gabby what the latest number of NEFOC network members,
As today, 500.
excuse me, NEFOC network members is?
It is 514 people.
That's beautiful and amazing. I could not have imagined when I was learning how to order poultry and trying to figure out where to get my feed and those things, I could not have imagined that there were this many people of color who might be engaging in the same types of things. It was beyond any concept that was even in my mind. And I felt absolutely like what I was doing was a singular thing that existed outside of what the Black people who I knew could even conceptualize. And it was treated that way. And now we have hundreds of people who are engaging in this thing and talking to one another. And that in itself is a beautiful thing. But back to the land trust, which sprung out of a common need to access land. Let's take a look at the model that NEFOC opted for. Reparations and rematriations. That is one way that we can secure access to land. I'm sorry, my screen is There it is. Okay. Facilitating ground leases. So we actually are helping farmers to secure leases so that they can farm on land that is not theirs as well. We are also accepting donations of parcels of land and easements, which allow our purposes on the land to thrive. And we will make purchases of land where necessary. Next slide, please.
This is the present part of NEFOC, the work. JD, I don't know if you want to start here.
Hey, actually, I'm gonna just talk a little bit before I jump into this slide. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm JD, go by he, him, they, them. So grateful for all of y'all making space and time to come here. And the first thing I really want to just get before we talk about the technicalities of like where this land just currently is just like really focusing on that our foundation really is on relationships. Relationships to our ancestors, relationships to ourselves, our lineages, our heritage, relationships to our children and future generations. And so we're not just like doing this like just to protect land, but this is really about building community, being aligned with ourselves, being aligned with the spirituality, and for those who believe in like the divine or God or a higher purpose, things like that, which is what brought all of us into this work. And one more thing I would just like to say about kind of our origin story, where we came from, is that a lot of the people who are holding space for us were our elders. Specifically, a lot of our elders who came together to help like launch this initial project were Black elders, such as Mama Claudia, Mama Karen, Leah, Baba Dennis. And so just to really uplift that, and just sharing that as part of our stories is that our elders really helped pave the way for some of us a little bit younger and some a lot younger folks to come into the space and help create and continue this work. And then I actually think this part is going to be Stephanie's to explain a little bit. So I'm going to pass it on to Steph.
Okay. Happy to do it. Thanks, everybody. Hi. So yeah, we've been doing this work for almost 3 years now amidst a pandemic, amidst many of us being directly impacted by the pandemic. And as you can see from where we came from this, the minds and the heart of the NEFOC network, from the minds and the heart and the spirit of our ancestors and our original instructions. And this need was named for land access. That comes with a lot of meaning and a lot of complication and complex, like as JD mentioned, relationships to land. So what was named initially by the NEFOC network is that there would be a recognition of mechanisms toward advancing shared sovereignty on land, and a recognition that this is unceded territory mostly, and what that means is that there were very few treaties or cessations on this land. In addition to that, there were and there is a legacy of enslavement and the benefits of enslavement on this land for large white land trusts. And so what we're looking at is a framework that we've developed that is fortified and founded in relationship, that advances mechanisms for shared sovereignty, that bridges the gaps in service that farmers of color have historically experienced since, transitioning into the USDA and the agriculture organization in 1862 onwards. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to create something that was not the status quo, right? The farmers of color who founded this organization and who planted the seed of this organization, we're not planting a status quo seed. that was going to build the same old land trust that does not see or recognize or honor our experiences or our ancestral connections to land. So after our foundational year of having one shared full-time position between myself and Saka Ivera, community conservation co-director, and then living through a pandemic and surviving that, we went into 2021 headfirst with building what you see before you, which is our first inaugural model for BIPOC land and food sovereignty. And it is comprised right now of 4 specific programs that are all overlapping and interconnected. We recognize that much of what we do in this status quo land trust world, in the technical assistance world, and the policy world is very siloed and does not include frameworks of for us, by us driven equity and justice. So we wanted to really steep this model in our lived experiences and what are the gaps in service, what are the gaps in policy, what are the gaps in technical assistance, how do we begin in right relationship to the territories, how do we begin in right relationship to rematriation and reparations. So what we've created is something of a regenerative, interconnected, interdependent framework that focuses on reciprocity and stewardship of relationships and resources through the relationships and reciprocity co-directorship, which is my role. We have the community conservation program, which focuses on defending and amending our community, and our community includes the NEFOC network, farmers of color in the Northeast and beyond, land stewards and earth workers in the Northeast and beyond, focusing on things like personhood and concentric conservation, climate mitigation and migration, and really recognizing that community includes not just human beings, but non-human beings. We are advocating and fortifying through our policy partnerships and climate justice co-directorship and program, and working to advance regional and national policy platforms, stewarding really partnerships that are founded in really strong relationships, and advocating for climate justice driven by and for a Black, Indigenous POC. And then finally, to round it all out and to ensure that those gaps in service continue to close and sew together, we have Gabby here, and who's going to talk about her program, the Land Network Program, which is seeding and strengthening our network of farmers of color and land stewards and earth workers of color in our communities by offering holistic technical assistance, mapping out the network, offering fellowships, connections to market, and obviously advancing equitable land access. So these 4 programs truly root us in that foundation of relationship and reciprocity, consultation, weaving together our experiences as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, POC farmers and land stewards and earth workers of color, and really in a lot of ways, rethinking and reimagining what this actually means, and looking to land not as property or as a resource, but as a living being that needs care and reciprocity and stewardship and reconnected relationship in order for us to survive what is now known as the Anthropocene, right? So living through what capitalism has extracted and created in on the land and in our own experiences as human beings who have relationships and responsibilities to land. So that really fueled the work of this year, which was a very internal year for NEFOC. It was much more about building these models, building these programs, building partnerships, and building strong relationships that we are now going to be, and coming into 2022, we'll share all the amazing things that are coming up, and just sort of trialing this year some of the things that we're building, right? So building small pilots for technical assistance and forging partnerships and things like the Black Farmers for New York State ecosystem, and just building these really wonderful relationships that are starting to forge a better understanding of what the needs are for POC and land access, and how to do it in a way that is not extractive or in any way replicating the same colonial harm that has been done for many, many years by extractive land industry. So that's a nutshell version of where we are right now. And what we're going to do now is move into talking about some of the programs. So I don't know if there's another slide. This is the overview of the slides, and I think we're going to pass it over to Gabby to talk about the Land Network program.
Can we actually go back? I want to say some more.
Yeah, go ahead, JD.
Sorry about that. So I think one of the first things I just want is people to really look at this diagram we have and realize that it's not one diagram like this is the land trust. And such as Stephanie was saying, is that it's really interdependent, and it was very intentional to be decentralized. Because just thinking in the whole aspect of a person, we didn't just want this on the backs of one person or even two people. The fact that we have 4 co-directors and a nonprofit is very unusual, and it's also very intentional because we realize that this work is deeper spiritual work. It's labor, very, very laborious, mental exhaustion. And then you need a community to hold that, even a community of leaders. And so trying to be as non-hierarchical as possible, even in a nonprofit, which is by default hierarchical. Another thing I want to say about the land trust is that, and I guess that's just as a board member, one of the board members, for us, the way we see it is that it's not necessarily a goal. Like the goal isn't to have just like a wonderful, beautiful land trust and getting as many people on the land as possible, which is what we do want. Or I should say it is a goal, but we want more than just a land trust. And I know it depends on where people are on the spectrum of like trying to be secure on land versus land abolition. So I know everybody got their own thing. And also thinking about, for some of us at least, it's like really thinking about like where can we be where we can be free, and that this is a means to an ends kind of thing. And so just really opening our thinking of that way in relationship to land, and like seeing land as something to be in relationship with, not just something to be worked on and just for production. And also, since even though we're Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, we also do want this to be a space where people who aren't, or who don't necessarily define themselves as farmers can also come to us. People who are earth workers, people who are stewards, and even hopefully eventually people who just want access to land to live and be on land can come to us and be part of the family once we get everything fully running. And then I think something also, which might be mentioned a little bit later, but just realizing that we have different ways of being with other organizations as well. So for example, we have something called like the Black Farmers Ecosystem in New York State, which is around different organizations that either work around capital, work around education, or work around land access for the Black farming community, or whether it's working with different indigenous folks for a consultation process. Because as a land trust, the other thing is that we don't want to recreate all these harms that has happened through colonization. Thank God for bearing with me. And so trying to be as mindful as possible in building all these different relationships, because it's not just like all Black folks are just going to want this one thing, or all indigenous folks are going to want this one thing, or all Asian folks are going to want this one thing. And so just realizing that it also, we've been really intentional about being slow too. Like this year was all about like being inward and developing and expanding. First it was just Stephanie and Saka, and then for a moment it was just Stephanie, and then now we have a team of 5, Gabby and Kenya too. And so realizing that this is work for the long run, and so we need to treat ourselves and our community that way. There's a sense of urgency in it, but you know, the more urgency we mean, if we burn out, that's not going to help us as a community. We need to take care of each other. We need to call on each other, and we need to do it in a process where we're able to reflect, but also continue to step forward while taking care of ourselves. So slow and steady is this type of work, and community is this type of work. You know, honoring ourselves and our ancestors is this type of work. And then one more thing, I don't know if we mentioned about it too much, but when we were really lifting off, we really lift off like during COVID. Like the first inaugural board kicked off, and then the next week, everything started shutting down. So imagine trying to build relationships when, you know, we have biggest pandemic in 100 years. And, you know, people personally got COVID, people's family members had COVID, and really holding space for each other in our communities and in the communities we're supposed to be in service of. So just wanted to name all that before we moved on. Thank y'all so much. And I'll go and pass it to, I think Gabby was about to go next.
Yes, thank you, JD, for sharing those beautiful words, Steph and Christine. We don't talk enough about our origin story, and I think it's very, very important always to ground ourselves in that blueprint, because that knowledge that the elders brought, that idea, that movement, that love, it is what informs our work today. So I am going to start to talk more about programs, about how we take this beautiful diagram and we actually put it into actions. As I said at the very beginning, I am the land network weaver. And that is a title that I hold really close to my heart, because we weave the relationship with people, the land, and among people, right? And the way that that we inform our work, it can be summarized in this quote that I learned from Stephanie, actually. She shared. It says, if you have to come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let's work together. And this is pretty much how we are informing our current and future work. There is a lot of urgency on white supremacy around helping and or trying to support from the optical, but we have the strength, we have the solutions, we have the knowledge that our ancestors, humans and non-human beings, has put on us over thousands of years. So having that in mind, the Land Network program work from the network, as Christine mentioned, in 2019, the network were 21 people. Today we are 514. So mapping the network, the needs, the wants, the communication that always it's expressed there, it is the primary work of this program. So we had a survey done in 2020, and from that we learned that what are the focus areas of work. To do that work, we implement deep listening. There is not expert here, we all are experts, and there is no way that no one can support each other if we don't sit and listen from our heart. So that is the very principle of how we work. The relationship with people and the relationship with the land began always with deep listening. We applied a holistic technical assistant. That means that we don't solve a project or support in a need. We walk with the collectives, the people, the networks, with them on the best way that they ask for support. We work a lot on transactional support. That means looking into leases, looking into possible capital access, look into who else have knowledge around in the area that is going to the land and walking the land with the farmers. It is contacting insurance company. It is contacting people to advocacy and resources that is there. We don't do that alone. We work with a wonderful network of partners. In New York, we have the Black ecosystem, that is Black Farmers Fund, Soulfire Farm, Farm School, Corbin Hill, and Black Farmers United. In South New England, we are starting to work with the Southern New England Farmers of Color Collective. We are working in Vermont with the Relief Collective, and we are working as well in different grants together with West New York organizations that are Food for the Spirit and Buffalo Go Green. So, and that is when we approach this work, we approach it from the relational point of view. This work is for us, by us, and that is where our priorities are with organizations and leaders that are part of our community. And with this, I will pass it to one of the wonderful examples of what the network is able to achieve. It's Kenya. She is running the Everytown program in Vermont. Kenya, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, everyone. I already am like, I want to join this organization. Oh, wait, I work with you guys. So I'm Kenya Lazuli. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. And last year, let's see, middle of the summer, I would guess, I started reaching out to land trusts and to primarily white-led organizations because I live in Vermont and that's who's here. About starting this project called Everytown, and just sort of trying to figure out how to utilize the existing tools of these organizations to place at least one piece of land from every town in the state in permanent trust for BIPOC. And I was met with many challenges, and Stephanie was one of the first people I actually spoke to about this. And fast forward to June, I was officially hired to keep doing this work with NEFOC. And since last year, it's taken a lot of shapes. At first, it was just me, and then it was sort of like obvious that I needed support to create an equitable process to make this work actually happen. And so I started working with volunteer community members to create the Neighbors Network. And what that looks like now is probably over 200 people throughout the state who are basically a part of a listserv. And they're committed to creating anti-racist space in their communities for the BIPOC that currently live there and the future BIPOC coming to steward land here in so-called Vermont. So with the Neighbors Network, we've done some trainings, we've done lots of gathering and just sort of community building and just lots of work to create relationship in an authentic way and share space and share time in an authentic way, so that the needs of the people who are coming to support this project, donating land, and the needs of the people who are coming, wanting to access land and be on land and stay on land, making sure that everybody's needs are met and that people know each other so that, you know, for whatever reason, positive or negative, everybody knows who to reach out to in any circumstance. It's been incredibly positive and uplifting and like very few moments of pushback, which I was really shocked about, honestly. And so that's like sort of the one half of the project where I spend a lot of energy. And then the other piece, another piece is the BIPOC Land Matching Committee, which so far is, I think there's 7 of us who are in the process of creating an equitable process for matching aspiring land stewards with donated land. And just sort of figuring out who needs to be involved in that conversation and like what the process is for onboarding, what the process is for when someone leaves. And just like all of the steps in between of getting people from, you know, sending an email or filling out a form saying, hey, I want to steward land. How do I do it? To like the moment when they are like, this is my farm. And it's sort of my dream job, honestly, just like, you know, figuring out how to support people in this way. I grew up in Vermont and I live next door to my parents on this big piece of land. And it was just very clear last year during COVID, the amount of privilege that we have being here and having access to land and just being able to go outside even during a pandemic and, you know, walk around our community and not feel nervous or worried. So those are some of the pieces that sort of came together to create this project. And like where we're going is sort of like very exciting, but also it's moving very fast. And since last year, we have 4 pieces of land in the donation that have started the donation process. One of them is a church, which will be used as a community center for NEFOC and for the Vermont Relief Collective and for all of the BIPOC projects that are happening in Vermont. And that's the one I'm probably the most excited about at the moment. But there's also, you know, a 7-acre hayfield and a 9-acre hayfield and a 3-acre piece with a cabin. So there's just sort of like a lot of movement without a lot of outreach actually for land donation. And that was kind of overwhelming and surprising to me because I wasn't sure how that part would work. And we actually haven't even put an ask out for land yet. So it's sort of like the momentum is here and I'm just like along for the ride is what it feels like, which is kind of great. And also I need to hold on because it's moving quickly. But I just wanted to finish up by saying that the NEFOC staff and board has been incredibly supportive and like wonderful in this process of onboarding me and also just supporting my project and making sure that I have everything I need to make this go. So, and I mean, even yesterday, Gabby was saying, let me know if you need anything, even though I know your hands are full. So thank you all so much. And I guess I'm passing it back to you, Gabby.
No, this part is actually Saka.
So Saka is unable to join right now, so I can take this piece, and then if he joins a little bit later, we can pass it back over. So Saka is caring for his young daughter who always comes first 100%. And in that case, I just want to cover a little bit about Saka's program because it's really a groundbreaking program that challenges a lot of the norms around what conservation and specifically what community conservation means. Saka shared this quote that is really something he grounds his work in at NEFOC. Break a vase and the love that assembles the fragments is stronger than the love which took its symmetry for granted when it was whole. And really Saka's poetry and his relationship to land and community is really unique, and it's one of those, you know, his thought that he generates from his program is really, really essential to this work. So you can go to the next slide and we'll share a little bit about the community conservation program. Other way, one more. There we go. So Saka is a defender, and he is building and sustaining and defending by creating infrastructures for intergenerational ecological knowledge transfer. He's doing this through a couple different ways. And as I mentioned before, Saka's community conservation framework includes community that is both human and non-human. And it's something that we think about a lot here at NEFOC because we're not just a farming organization as much as the name of our organization says Farmers of Color. We recognize that our Indigenous ways of being, doing, and knowing included farming as a relationship to land. And because of that, we are really rooted in ancestral relationship within every part of this organization. And in the community conservation program specifically, Saka is building pathways through connecting us back to our original instructions through ceremony, but doing this in a way that really interweaves policy and legislative language and administrative practice and ceremony and ancestral relationships in ways that are just truly unique and are already being really picked up by some of these larger organizations who are interested in this work, but don't necessarily have the connections or memory to do this work. So Saka is doing things like building legislative language and administrative practice for ecosystem and ecosystem-owned land trusts, which is very different from what we think of as land ownership. We don't believe that we can own land. We actually liken ownership of land to ownership of human beings. And we will never replicate that model of colonialism or harm or ownership of any being at all. So eventually the practice will be for the ecosystem to own itself again. Sustaining ceremonies place in every site of transition and transaction upon land. So ensuring that everything we're doing is rooted in not just personal one-to-one relationship or organization to organization relationship, but ancestral relationship, and commemorating that by reintegrating the sacred into the work that we're doing. And then finally, defending the right to migrate for all species in this contemporary climate crisis, and understanding that we need to live into the current reality of what we're all experiencing. Climate change is not something that's far, far in the future that, you know, maybe 2 or 3 generations from now will experience. We're experiencing the climate crisis right now, and we're already seeing the live migration, real time, of humans and non-humans all over the place to escape the physical threats that are actually happening. You can go on to the next slide. I think that's so just briefly touch on the some of the things that are coming out of Saka's work. The one thing that I would say that to keep an eye out for, especially if you're interested in getting involved in some of the work that he's doing and innovations that he's creating through this program. We're working with the Earth Law Center to develop personhood policy. We're working with the Sustainable Economies Law Center. We're working with the Agrarian Trust, and something that will come out of this is a fellowship, actually, that is going to be really amazing, that will be able to open some pathways to not only learning about these ceremony-centered skills and land relationship skills, but to enact them and working with the Land Trust as we evolve and develop. So thank you, Saka, so much for your contribution to this work. It's brilliant, and we're all really excited about it, and we hope Inara is doing well. My program, the Relationships and Reciprocities program, is a program that, in a nutshell, as I mentioned before, we begin everything in right relationship. And there's a lot of harm that's been done to Black, Indigenous, and people of color since, 1491 here, at least, and much earlier in many places. So what we are trying to do is to not just reverse harm or reverse time. We're trying to repair, and we're trying to take up the space that has not been created for us. So we're reclaiming our place as people with relationship to land and to our ancestors. And everything that we do is forged from this place of relationship. So parts of what that include are things that, in some ways operationalize the Land Trust. Like my work is really about meeting people, getting to know how you relate to the work that we're doing, and calling in those things, those relationships, the gathering, the caretaking, and regeneration of resources like capital that we need in order to continue this work, as well as ensuring that we are partnering with folks who are willing to and are ready to partner in ways that are non-harmful to people of color, and being accountable if you have caused harm, for example. So we've been creating pathways for accountability, legal mechanisms, and including the cultivation and tending of relationships within our own community, as well as Indigenous partners and stakeholders, private donors, public grantors, and policymakers. And we'll talk about policy in just a moment with our new policy program. So some of the projects that are coming out of this are something that we're calling the Braided Bliss Project, which is a space that we'll talk about in just a moment for Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty and solidarity. Our Indigenous Consultation and Partnerships Program, as well as the partnership with the First Light Learning Journey and NEFOC that we'll talk about right now. So these 3 dots that you see here are some of what we've learned over the past 3 years of doing this work. First of all, we needed to build the foundation of NEFOC, to look at the legal mechanisms, to look at the frameworks of what has been done, what is extractive, what is colonial and patriarchal and capitalist, and to undo some of that, and to recognize some of the overarching themes of what it means to be Black, Indigenous, or another person of color working in a landscape that is primarily within the Land Trust world, overarchingly and overwhelmingly white. And learning from those first 2+ years at this point, we've found some very specific bottlenecks in the work. And again, we've mentioned this a few times, but we've heard the word urgent, urgent, urgent quite often. People who are coming to NEFOC and saying, time is of the essence and we can't wait any longer. Where is the land? Where is the money? Where is the land access? We're working on it, but we are not going to operate at the same level of speed as white supremacy culture. We actually refuse to do that. So part of, what we were mentioning before is living through a pandemic and actually having had that experience personally myself, and holding these relationships in those moments of urgency, and choosing to, and sometimes push my own boundaries and pay the price for it. And then other times actually naming and owning those boundaries and reclaiming my humanity by doing that, and our humanity by doing that. So these 3 bullet points here that you're looking at are the foundation of the work that we're doing to ensure equitable land, not just land access for the sake of land access, but equitable land access that is not going to harm anybody else as much as possible. And we always say there's never a totally safe environment, but we can work as safely as possible and create safer spaces. So what we noticed is that, number one, that the lands that we are living on are primarily unceded territory in the Northeast. And because of that, it was named very early on in this process by the NEFOC network that we would want to build strategies for shared sovereignty, recognizing that these are sovereign nations living in the Northeast, whether they're federally or recognized or unrecognized, that sovereign nations deserve to be treated as sovereign nations and not overlooked in either conservation policy or land access. And the way that we're doing that is by building a very strong and meaningful Indigenous consultation and partnerships program that includes, building relational bridges between many, many different nations across the Northeast. And when we end up receiving an offer potentially of land donation, part of it is to actually enact this protocol of Indigenous consultation. Building partnerships is more meaningful to us, though. I think consultation is the lowest sort of lowest hanging fruit when it comes to building relationships. Consultation just means you're just checking in with somebody. Partnerships is standing together side by side and working to advance sovereignty together. So that's really our ultimate goal with that. And we're in conversation and relationship building phases with many different First Nations across the Northeast. Right now we're working, and we've recognized that one of the biggest barriers and obstacles to this is the intersecting oppressions of Black and Indigenous communities, and wanting to uplift and also center reparations, and recognizing that oftentimes anti-Blackness and anti-Indigeneity become more of an issue that we just cannot get through. It's incommensurable, and there have been many times of many opportunities to be able to heal through this that have broken down. So our goal is to create a space for this through something called somatic abolition. And we've created a program called the Braided Bliss Program, which is directly addressing this. So that means Braided Bliss is short for Black Liberation and Indigenous Sovereignty and Solidarity. And we're working with folks up specifically right now in Wabanaki territory, but all over the place. They're starting to sign on to this project, and specifically Black-led and Indigenous-led partners who are working to advance this together and to create these spaces of celebration and somatic abolition together, so that we can heal through a lot of the oppression Olympics that our communities have that have so far bottlenecked a lot of this work, or stopped some of the progress, or at least are, I would say, not, you're kind of reverting to processes that are not as equitable because it takes too long, or apparently for some folks. So we want to make sure that we're offering this the time and the dedication and the care that it really truly deserves, because we feel that it's the only way to move forward in right relationship with one another, and to understand these intersecting oppressions, to honor them, and to create healing spaces for them is truly, truly the way that we'll be able to create the worlds that we want our future generations to inherit. And finally, the last piece that we're recognizing is NEFOC has been approached by many, many, many different white-led land trusts who all want the same thing. They want to create something that hasn't existed in their organizations before, and that is equitable land access. These are primarily organizations that are, if not 100% white-led, at least 90% white-led, are coming to us because they see us as subject matter experts in this regard, and want to work with NEFOC as a way to transform their organizations from inequitable into equitable and healing organizations that steward land. We recognize that if we were to work with each organization individually, that it would take all of our time and all of our energy. And that's when we started talking with First Light Learning Journey and Peter Forbes, who has been doing this work of bringing together and educating white led land trusts in Wabanaki territory, and then out in now in Oregon. And what we're doing is partnering with First Light. We're just starting to build this process and fundraise for it, to work with First Light to be that translation and educator and the re-educator. So creating these spaces of understanding, of unlearning the colonial ways of being, doing, and knowing that have caused extractive harm to people of color and to the land, and to reintegrate understandings that will then transition land out of their land trusts into other BIPOC-led land trusts. So these three together are really addressing these big needs, right? That we are on unceded territory, that we are working together to build relationships between Black and Indigenous communities for reparations and repatriation, and to move and redistribute wealth out of large white-centered land trusts who have been holding the keys to the kingdom for a very long time. So that's sort of a lot of what I do in a nutshell. And one thing I haven't actually mentioned, or that aren't on the slides, but I think is quite innovative for NEFOC's role here, is because we work in relationship, we also center meaningful repair of those relationships when things don't work out or communication breaks down. So what we're doing is centering the concept of Indigenous conflict transformation in the work that we do, so that we can use that as a place to be heard and hear and build accountability plans when there is harm done. And that's something that we're employing with farmers and people who are leasing to them, for example. Inter-organizationally, we're doing that when there's harm caused, and we're finding it to be very effective, and not just naming that there's been harm done, but actually transforming that relationship and creating something positive out of it after all is said and done. So that's about it for right now, as much as I'll share on the work that I am doing. And I don't know, Gabby, do you want to take over for Larissa's?
Yes. This is our latest program: policy, partnership, and climate justice. And this is done by the wonderful Larissa Jackinson. When she started to work with us, right away, she needed to take a sabbatical for health reasons. And she recently had a major procedure, so she couldn't be here with us. But she will start to build next year how we can make change in the future. So our different programs address trauma that has been carried from the past. We are implementing tools in the present to address and to start to heal, and looking into the future, community conservation and the policy, partnership, and climate justice will give us the tools that we need to make changes for our communities. Yes, and if you have a specific questions about the policies, partnership, or the climate justice work that Larissa will begin in the second trimester of 2022, I will let her know, and probably she will get back to you before December on those questions. With all that being said, here are a list of what are our next steps, and I wanna express gratitude. If I will be doing this work, I couldn't be doing it in a better place, with better humans, with people that I admire, with people that I learn every day, with people that focus healing and humanity first. And yeah, with all that, I want to say thank you. In my language is gracias for being here. And with this, we finish the presentation part. So we welcome questions related to our programs in the chat. Everything that is related with policies, we will pass it to Larissa. We won't be able to answer here, but we will pass it to Larissa. Thank you. Gracias.
I just want to uplift while we're waiting for some questions to roll in. That last slide, and I'm just going to bring it up in on my own screen so that I can see, because I want to lift up some of the things that we're actually doing for the next year. So please load your questions, and I see that there was one, but I'm going to need you to be a little bit more. That's Shaman Pomage. You can maybe clarify that question a little bit. I'm not exactly sure what you're meaning right now. We did address Indigenous relationships, but I don't understand what you mean about and excluding Indians not taxed, or where that came from. So if you want to be a little bit more descriptive, I would be happy to try to answer that for you. In the meantime, I wanted to lift up some of the things that we're doing for 2022, especially for those of you who are a part of the NEFOC network joining us right now. As we mentioned, we've been fairly insular and have gone inward a lot this year, building, healing from COVID and all of those things. And in the next year, we are continuing our Indigenous Consultation and Partnerships program and starting to commemorate through ceremony the relationships that we've been building, and beginning the consultation process as we move forward in a relationship, like with what Kenya was mentioning, with some of the folks some of the land projects that are happening in Vermont. We're starting to consult there with the Wabanaki Confederacy. And the Braided Bliss Project will start meeting in Maine and Wabanaki territory for our first gathering, starting sometime in the spring. That's still to be scheduled, but we'll have a group of folks, including some of our board members and some of the other folks up in Maine. We're going to be having an on the land gathering for the First Light Partnership with SUNY Environmental Sciences and Forestry program, as well as First Light Learning Journey. There are going to be some fellowships that are coming up with the Technical Assistance Fellowship program, as well as the Community Conservation program. We're going to have something that's very important right now, which is our board elections, which we're really excited about, that maybe Christine and JD might want to talk about a little bit at the end, if you have any thoughts or anything to say about that. But stay tuned on the NEFOC Network listserv if you have interest in joining our board. As well as we'll be announcing our first capital campaign for land acquisitions in January, and that's going to be along with an album release by the band Bikini Kill, which is hosting and supporting our work through the release of their newest album, which includes members of the Pixies and all these like really fun bands and people. So that'll be amazing, and that's all in support of NEFOC, and as far as accessing land and building a land acquisition fund. We're advancing our partnerships with the Agrarian Trust, with Bomazine Land Trust, with the Black Farmers Ecosystem of New York State, which is Corbin Hill Food Project, Farm School New York City, Black Farmer Fund, Soulfire Farm, just to continue that good work. We're also advancing partnerships with other folks that we want to lift up here. I think Gabby had mentioned the Southeast New England Farmers of Color Collective, who we're working with on a lot of things. The Farmers and Ranchers Stress Assistance Network is another one. And we're evolving our reparations map, which we haven't talked about a lot here, but I'm going to put in the chat for folks. We're redesigning the reparations map right now. We're redesigning the process. It's going to be much more story-based, so you'll be able to see the farms and like who's doing the work and what they're doing, and the stories that come along with their progress and evolution. We're offering some technical assistance in consultation for some mainstream organizations. We're creating and advancing culturally respectful signage and historical truth-telling on land in many ways, especially where we see these really harmful signs that commemorate colonial harm and violence and genocide. We're going to be having a BIPOC land access convergence that we're developing. We're starting to build in language justice specifically over the next 2 years, Gabby, right? With Grading Seeds Spanish First Fellowship. We're going to start reconvening our NEFOC network gatherings and skill shares. And this way we're going to be doing them virtually as well as in specific places across the Northeast to get folks together on land to share skills and celebrate with one another. And as Gabby mentioned, with Larissa's program, we're going to become a lot more involved with development and advocacy of policy and analysis through our lens as we gain capacity to do so. So that's just sort of a nutshell version of just some of the things that we're doing in the next year. So stay tuned.
I will say that there is plenty for next year. And so it's next conference, so please come when we talk more about this. We have a question from Francesca. Can you talk more about Indigenous conflict transformation process, how that looks like, and how do you think that other organizations and community learn or can learn from that practice? I'm sorry, I have it through private chat. That is why maybe you don't see it in the chat. I'm sorry for that.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. This person will love to learn more about Indigenous conflict transformation process, how that looks like, and how you think other organizations and community learn from that practice.
Yeah, I think this is a really strong one, right? I mean, most of you know, if you joined maybe late, I just want to reiterate, I am Indigenous. I'm Mohawk Turtle Clan. I'm from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And part of the work that I've done has been outside of NEFOC, that is one of the skills in my bundle that I brought to the work, is a framework that I co-developed with Dr. Rick Hill, Jim Dockstader, many folks from Six Nations and around the territories and treaty territories and what is now known as Ontario, something called Indigenous Conflict Resolution. And then Jim and I took that and started building in transformative frameworks for that. It's really, really essential to specifically working, like I mentioned earlier, not just to resolve a problem, which often comes up when you're working between organizations and specifically white-led organizations and POC-led organizations. There's always a level of lack of safety and harm that comes with that. So this is a process that we've initiated to not just resolve conflict in that sort of, let's just get over with it and deal with it and move on, but to transform that conflict. So far, we've done this, I think, 3 times. And it's not just a one-off process. It's something that actually is something you maintain over a period of time and you keep checking in on. But the process is fairly simple in that it's similar to a lot of other mediations or conflict transformation or dispute resolution circles and in a circle format, but we ground it in ceremony that is specifically culturally relevant to communities involved. And we create an accountability plan. And one thing that I'll say that's very different in this framework is that usually there's a harmer and a harmed person or group, and we address repairing the harm. But what we do that's quite different in this framework is we recognize that the person or organization that is causing the harm is actually doing that from a legacy of trauma that they've inherited. And because of that, they actually need to be healed too. And so it's a way of taking some of the story and some of the foundational philosophy of, for us at least, well, I'll just use the Haudenosaunee example of some of the teachings around Taudadaho, who is one of our great leaders, who was initially a very, very harmful person causing a great deal of harm, but who was healed through community surrounding him and connecting him back to spirit and combing what they say are the snakes out of his hair and wrapping around him and healing him and lifting him up as the leader who he became. And that's what we see for the harm that's being caused in some of these relationships, is that people and organizations have a great deal of power, but there's also colonial trauma that comes with that. And in order for us to be able to transform that, we need to be able to actually address the root cause of these issues that are creating lack of access to land and lack of equity and representation and colonial harm that have already been perpetuated. So it's a layered and transformative framework that I think is really needed in the land trust world and in land access. And we're just trying it out and seeing how it works. And we're seeing that it's actually becoming very effective for building stronger partnerships as well. So thank you for asking that.
We have hand raised by Amber. Amber is member of our network.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this, and then also just for bringing me into the network. And I've been trying to reconcile a lot of things. So thank you for your patience too with that. So my kind of this big question that I have is when we acknowledge First Nations and kind of original groups of peoples who were stewarding lands, and then we're looking at groups of peoples who came forcibly and forcibly stewarded lands, and we're trying to reconcile all of this at the same time. I'm wondering if you all can kind of speak to, and it's a little bit abstract, but also I'm wondering if we could look at how do you envision this? You know, we talk a lot about, like you said, what we want to undo and how we want to do things differently. But if you could talk about how you envision what would the world be, or how would, if we're not owning land anymore, if we're having a different relationship, does that make sense? Is there a way that you could imagine how we would be interacting with the land? How would we learn from people who have been able to hold on to this wisdom? How do we honor people? How do we share knowledge in a way that isn't extractive? And so I don't know. I mean, I know that is a very big question, but I just wonder, when you all are dreaming of what the world is going to look like through all of this work, if you could just paint me any piece of that picture.
For this, I will close the loop from one of our newest members of the network to one of the first members of the network, Christine. How will you address that? And I would love to hear JD's thoughts as well here.
Thank you. My internet connection is unstable, so I hope you can hear me clearly. I believe that the way of addressing this concern is through the relationship building that needs to happen between Black and Indigenous populations. And as we take on the system, so to speak, we are doing that together, as opposed to having two totally different roads and two different methods of addressing the harms and the wrongs that exist right now and that have historically existed for generations before any of us. Partnering and having those full-fledged relationships and understanding that there is not a necessary enmity between us. That is the answer. Right now, we have a lesser layer of that, and that as land comes to us, we're not just using that land to serve one purpose or another. We are using the Indigenous Consultation Protocol and asking, what shall we do with this space? What do you need this? Do you want to do something here? How can we cooperatively figure out how to utilize and care for this land that's coming into our hands now? But ultimately building those relationships and undoing the historical opposition that we've been put into, understanding as a Black person that Indigenous people are in no way enemies to Black people and vice versa, addressing racism within Indigenous populations, addressing anti-Indigenous sentiment within Black populations. And I think that it is hard work, but it starts with understanding that there is no function in our enmity other than to divide us and keep us weaker so that we can't fight against the oppression that this whole system was founded on and relies on now.
Hopping on that question too, and I just want to thank you, Amber, for sharing that question, and welcome to the listener and the family. So I think I want to just start off with, I'm gonna zoom back a little bit and just, it's like this concept of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, just realizing that that term itself is kind of like a way for us to collaborate as different communities. Because we haven't fully formed as a BIPOC community yet, in the sense of like, maybe we all come into spaces that are BIPOC spaces, but the Black community, the Indigenous community, the Asian community, the Latino community aren't all one whole community yet. We just come together in pockets. And so we're still like developing and trying to also heal from past traumas while trying to move forward. And to continue with what Christine was saying, I think it really is important for us, while developing Black and Indigenous relationships specifically, to realize both the histories of where we work together and also the histories of harms. Because as Christine was saying, there is groups within both sides that are anti-Black and anti-Indigenous. There's mistrust on both sides. So I think sometimes we focus on this one narrative of BIPOC, Black Indigenous solidarity, which is something we strive for, and in some spaces are true. And there are Black Indigenous folks, so I want to highlight them as well. And on the same time, there are for different reasons, there are, why would you say, like beef between communities, or suspicion between communities, or a feeling of, oh, my community deserves this remediation before reparations, or we need reparations before remediation, and vice versa. One of the ways in which I hope we get to continue to develop this is by creating those spaces where we can come together on the land, create abundance, move out of this scarcity where we're fighting for things. Really getting to sit down and talk and learn about each other's history. Do people really know about Black history? Do people really know about Indigenous history? Really getting to know folks, their different tribes, where they're located. You could have a whole bunch of people who are Indigenous just chilling with you and you don't even know them, they're right around the block. New York City has the highest amount of Indigenous folks in the country. And most people wouldn't even know that. They would probably think it's somewhere in the Southwest or the West or the Midwest. And so different things like that is what I come to think of first. It really is this relationship building one at a time. And really like where we are at the moment and then expanding. So like, for example, when I was living in Massachusetts and I was working for different organizations, we reached out to the Nipmuc Nation, and doing different things like that, doing things more than just like land acknowledgements, building actual community. I hope that answered your question.
We have a comment from Patrice in the chat that it says, there is not concrete answer for this question, in my opinion, since our ways of understanding our perspectives, our ways of communicating are ever evolving as the land itself. So thank you for that comment, Patrice.
I just want to say one more thing real quick too. I think it's also not forcing relationships. Sometimes spaces, Indigenous people just need Indigenous spaces to be themselves and be in their culture. Black folks just need space to be with themselves and their culture and let it grow organically. Not just pushing this thing because we see it as ideal.
Thank you, JD. We
And
have.
I'll add one other thing. Oh,
Go ahead, Christine. Yes,
sorry.
of course. I'm sorry.
I think that what JD said about learning history reminded me that there are bad parts in our history. There are things that we might wish didn't happen the way that they did. And running from those things is not the way to go. Understand that things that have happened within a context and within a society that encouraged those things. So I say we don't run from those pieces of our histories.
And I want to add one more thing before we go on this, because I know that we got to get going soon, but I want to acknowledge that the people who were snatched up from Africa, specifically to be enslaved, they were indigenous people. So we have to think about that as well, right? We're not, we have so many connections and ancestral connections, and it's important to acknowledge that the construct of race and the construct of indigeneity has so far been defined by the gaze and by the onlooker and the white gaze specifically. So I want to honor that the indigenous peoples of Africa were taken from Africa and enslaved here. They carry their ancestral knowledge with them and their indigenous connections and their original instructions. And this Black and indigenous is very complex. It's very complicated. It's not something we're going to answer right now. Obviously, we're feeling it out and evolving into it and living into it as we go as well. But part of this is actually acknowledging how interwoven and how interconnected our communities are, instead of how divided they've become through the colonial gaze of racial constructs that were created not for us in any way, shape, or form. So I want to be able to meet nation to nation, human to human, person to person, recognizing that we have deep ancestral connections that are indigenous, and whether we consider them indigenous or not is for us to figure out in those somatic abolitionist spaces that we're creating together. So we're creating an experiment that so far has been really beautiful and enlivening, and that's what those Skillshare spaces are for. So as we come together in relationship, we're talking about these things, and not just talking and theorizing, but now putting them into practice. And that's really what I want to leave folks with NEFOC right now. NEFOC 2019 to 2021 has been all about foundation and theory and exploration and really thinking about these things very intentionally and very meaningfully. 2022 is about putting those things into practice. So we really look forward to you joining us along that journey.
I want to answer a question that came in the chat around about the South, land in the South that nobody is farming it. Elizabeth, unfortunately, I don't have any information about the South. We are the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. We work with 24 indigenous territories in the Northeast. There is about 9 different states. And I will love to connect you with partner organizations, cousins from the South that are doing this work already. The short answer to your question as to NEFOC has a project related with land available for landless farmers in the South. No, we have our hands full here in the Northeast. We have 3 minutes left. So if you have any question, any other question, you're very welcome, Elizabeth. Just let us know. You can always email us to the email that I will put in the chat. We move at the pace of trust. So that means that it will take a couple of weeks before we get into your email, but we will reply and we will form relationships and partnerships with those that have value aligned with us and are doing this work from a place of healing, from a place of reciprocity, from a place of respect. And I would like to give the last part to Christine.
Wait, can we just, I think there's 2 more questions we missed.
Okay, So sorry, I didn't see it coming. So go ahead.
I know there was
Thanks,
a
JT.
question in the very beginning about, I think it was from Elizabeth. About, sorry, I just lost it.
Yeah, related with immigration and policies, because that is part of Larissa work. I will pass that question to Larissa and I will get back to Elizabeth about that. And then there was a question from Shaman related with Indigenous work. I privately text them. I didn't get an answer from them and they are not longer in the call.
Thank you.
I wonder if anyone can shed any light, because I'm reading this question and thinking maybe I don't understand something. Aborigine American Indigenous people is brought up. Is that a distinct people from Indigenous American people? Sorry. So maybe we're all confused by it.
If you would like to, and you're either not here or you don't have the capacity to ask that question, you can feel free to reach out to me to ask about our Indigenous consultation and partnerships process, or take a look at our website, get in touch with the NEFOC network to keep abreast of what we're doing and how that's evolving. The only thing I can think of to answer back to that, I'm just trying to find that question again, is, yeah, and I cannot find it. I see something about we are not involved with commerce and see a lot of discussions about our ancestral lands. That's, what I'm understanding is Aborigine is another word for Indigenous that used here very commonly. So I'm kind of wondering if you're talking about consultation, and that's exactly what we're talking about here, is Indigenous consultation with the traditional governance systems, not with band-elected, band council governance or federal governance systems that are inserted into Indigenous communities. And what we're doing is consulting with, building relationships with, and actually asking express permission to be on these lands and to partner on projects on these lands and to steward these lands. So recognizing that, with the United Nations rights on Indigenous peoples and everything that's in accordance with that, and Article 25, we are we need to consult with, and at the very least consult, and that would be according to UNDRIP Article 25, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with.
I will say for those in the future looking this that are not able to look the chat that we're all referring to, you can email us to connect@nefoclandtrust.org for your question, or you can visit our website, nefoclandtrust.org, for further information. Thank you for uplifting our work, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you all here.
Amber, yes. If you send an email, I think that one of us can forward a short list to you.
And Amber, you're on the network, so you're going to see all of the, we're going to have a call for board elections. We're going to have NEFOC network skill shares, ways to get involved with fellowships. All of those things will be on the listserv coming up in the next couple of months.